In this video, I will talk about the limitations of servlets and introduce JavaServer pages. I've already spoken about how servlets are the fundamental technology for deploying Java code on a web server, and I created a simple IP address lookup tool using servlets. But I'd like you to think about whether servlets are a practical solution to web development. Could you build large-scale websites using servlets alone? And would you want to? Well, technically anything's possible with servlets, but the question of whether you would want to write lots of simple servlets is probably going to be no. Servlets alone are very limited. And here are some of the limitations of servlets. HTML and Java are combined. So the Java code and the HTML code, they're all mixed together. In a large page, the Java could get lost among all the HTML code, or conversely, a page with lots of logic could cause the HTML to get lost among all the Java. Graphic designers usually don't code. It'd be very unreasonable to expect that a graphic designer would need to edit HTML strings embedded in your out.println statements in your Java files. Even if you don't have a graphic designer, you might still use a HTML authoring tool that doesn't support HTML that's been hidden or embedded inside Java strings. More generally, HTML inside Java can just be difficult to edit. Editing and escaping strings in a Java file is hardly convenient. And not only is it inconvenient, it's difficult to check that your HTML is correct. I know of no tool that can scan through a Java file and check that the strings contain valid HTML. Instead, you'd have to make the site live and test that the output is correct. Now, it's technically possible to build large-scale websites using servlets, but I suspect that if you tried to do it, you'd end up inventing some kind of templating or scripting language yourself to make it easier. And that's where JavaServer pages, or JSP, comes in. JSP is a templating technology built on servlets. So here's a simple servlet that counts the visitors to a page. It declares a variable named counter, and remember that the server only creates one instance of a servlet, so this variable will be shared across all requests and all users. At the start of the doGet method, there's a fragment of Java that adds 1 to the counter. I've written this code inside a synchronize block because a single servlet handles all requests, and then multiple web server threads will be executing this method. And synchronize is a feature of Java that helps manage those multiple threads. It only allows one thread to make a change at a time, and this helps ensure that the counter is correctly updated without any data losses. Finally, as part of the HTML generation code, I include an expression. It outputs the number of visitors to the servlet. Now, all of these concepts, declarations, fragments, and expressions are important to understand when we look at JSP. So here's the JSP equivalent of our servlet. The declarations, they're written inside a less than %! brackets, and this is how you declare an instance variable. Fragments go inside less than % brackets, and this is how you write a Java statement and declare local variables, local method variables. Expressions go inside less than % brackets, and the value of this expression will be written out in response. JSP allows us to freely mix and match Java and HTML. So this is how you could write a for loop in JSP. Behind the scenes, a JSP is automatically translated into a servlet. These JSP pages are almost exactly the same as the servlets. They extend from HTTP servlet, and you get access to the request and response variables. Actually, that's not quite true. You get a few extra objects that are implicitly available on any JSP page. Here's a list. You can use any of these variables without declaring them and without manually extracting them from the HTTP servlet superclass or from the request or response. And finally, as a quick side note, JSP supports an XML syntax, and here's an example. It isn't very common, but it can sometimes be helpful if you need a way for your JSP pages to be valid XML. Okay, now let's revisit the challenges of working with a servlet. Have we solved our problem? Well, with JSP, the HTML is no longer embedded in the Java code. But this time we have the opposite problem. The Java code is now embedded in the HTML. So we've got the same problem, but the other way around. JSP is probably easier for graphic designers and also for graphic design software to process. But we've still got the problem of Java mixed in with our HTML. Certainly, bringing out the HTML does make it easier to change the appearance, so we've solved that problem. And what about the difficulty of checking the generated HTML? Checking whether it's valid. It does seem like it should be easier. But here, let's look at an example. I'd like you to pause this video and see how many mistakes you can find in the code. There are at least 3. Okay, so now that you've had a chance to find the mistakes, we'll look at the code systematically. Now, lines 1 and 2, they look okay. What about line 3? Line 3 seems to have a problem. Can you see it? The method equals get, it's missing a closing quote, so we just need to insert a double quote. Lines 4, 5, and 6, they look fine. We can see in line 7 we're opening a Java fragment, so inside it we've got some Java code. Line 8 looks fine, but line 9 has a problem. Line 9 is missing a closing bracket, and we need to insert that closing parenthesis. Line 10 ends that Java fragment we opened on line 7. So lines 11, 12, and 13 will only be displayed when that if statement evaluates to true. In other words, when that parameter name type is equal to couple. Lines 15 to 17 then end the if statement, and they look fine. And lines 18 to 19 look fine too. So far we've found 2 errors. Fortunately, both of them will be detected by a good HTML editor. If they aren't automatically detected, then the closing bracket on line 9 will result in a compile error when you visit the page, so that should be very obvious. And the missing close quote on line 3 would be detected by a HTML validator, and that would also be easy to check. The third error, it's particularly difficult. Notice that we open the form tag on line 3 and then close it inside the if statement on line 14. This means that the generated HTML will sometimes be valid, but sometimes invalid. When the guard on the if statement is false, when the type parameter is not equal to couple, then the generated HTML will be invalid. So I would argue that JSP is a small improvement on servlets, but we still have many problems. In summary, servlets are Java classes that generate HTML. JavaServer pages are written as HTML that includes Java, but is automatically compiled down into a servlet. They're a first step towards building large-scale websites, but they still have many problems. I'd like you to think about how you might attempt to solve some of these problems. Could you improve JSP, or would you use a different technology?